Hi everyone, welcome to this video on lesson 4 of the variation and inheritance scheme of work. So this lesson is on Mendel, Gregor Mendel, the monk from, I think from Austria, who bred pea plants together and who was kind of unknown in his lifetime, but it turned out he had stumbled across, or he had come across something really profound, which was essentially the mechanism for inheritance. Now, I've got to say, this is something that Naomi Austin and I, so Naomi is the lead practitioner at Homely Park, and she planned a lot of these lessons, and I've just helped to kind of get the resources out as part of the shared curriculum. We've had a discussion, and this discussion is still ongoing as to whether this lesson should be included in the scheme of work at all, because it's kind of hard to teach about Mendel without lapsing into some of the language that students will use at GCSE, things like homozygous, heterozygous, alleles, dominant, recessive, all of that sort of stuff. So this is one for you to make a decision on in conversation with your head of department, whether you want to teach this and go all in with the language, or whether you want to leave it. We put it in because it's such an important part of this whole story about inheritance. But again, students will kind of cover this again at GCSE, and you may wish to leave it until they've learned a bit more about DNA and things like that, which will help a lot of this stuff make a bit more sense. But anyway, assuming you are going to teach it as part of this, I am not going to use, or I'm going to try and avoid using GCSE language wherever possible. And it's just a really nice, again, it's another example of the kind of guest-deduced check model of scientific thinking, which I'm going to talk students through, and this is a diagram that I actually used with some students earlier on this year. So what Mendel did, and this is all this diagram is showing, what Mendel did is he took some pea plants. So I've indicated these, I mean, this is a little pod of peas. He was not breeding the peas together because peas are just the fruits of the pea plants. So he was, that's a good question. Are they the fruits or are they the seeds? Anyway, hopefully you know what I mean. But they're not the plants themselves. So he was breeding the plants themselves together. I've just drawn those as the pods just to show that. But then from then on, as you can see, I'm just drawing the colours of the peas. But that's one thing just to watch out for, just being particular with your language with students. So he was breeding pea plants together. And what he did first is bred together yellow pea plants for many generations until they were what we call purebred. And that means that whenever you bred any of those yellow pea plants together, you would always get yellow pea plants. So they were purebred. You would consistently, generation after generation, if you bred them together, you'd get more yellow pea plants. And the same with these green ones. So these were purebred green pea plants. And you know, I'm sure there's lots of stories available. So if you want to go and do some research, you know, it's quite an evocative story. The thought of this monk somewhere in the Alps, or in the foothills of the Alps, in his monastery, carefully tending to his pea plants and wondering about the nature of it all and inheritance and so on. So you can, this is a nice lesson to teach to students. But you can imagine him thinking, okay, well, if I breed this purebred yellow pea plant with this purebred green pea plant, what would I expect to happen? And here you can see that question, what would I expect to happen? That is this deduce phase of scientific reasoning. So what would I expect to happen? And you can ask students. So this I would not reveal all at once. I would ask students at this point. So you can imagine I've only drawn these first two. You bred them together. Okay, what would you expect to happen? What would you expect the peas of the new plant to look like? And a lot of students will tell you something along the lines of a kind of yellowy green. So you'd expect some sort of yellowy green plant. And that is what Mendel expected, or at least you can tell them that as part of the story. He expected to get some sort of hybrid mix between the two colours. So imagine his surprise, and this is the check part of scientific reasoning. Imagine his surprise when all of the plants that he bred together, purebred yellow, purebred green, they all came out yellow. So this was a real shock, and Mendel was surprised by this. So he thought, okay, well, I'm just going to carry on. I'm going to carry on by breeding these yellow pea plants together, breeding the offspring together. So he's not breeding now the purebred. These ones that he breeds together down here are the offspring that came out of this one. And I've just drawn 4 here, but he's breeded lots and lots and lots of these. I'm just trying to illustrate the point. And what he noticed was, when he bred those together, is that, and again, I've just made up the numbers here, but he noticed that about a quarter of them came out green, and about 3/4 of them came out yellow. So this is the story that we want to tell. And then we want to use that to give students a sense of, well, what he realised was that actually each of these pea plants must be passing on what he called, or what we're going to say he called, hereditary units. So we're bringing in this idea of inheritance, but we're not going into alleles. Now, if you want to use that language, that's fine, but we've kind of deliberately left that out because we don't just want this to be a GCSE light lesson. We want to tell the story, and we really want to put the focus here on Mendel's thinking as opposed to the language of genetics. But again, if you find that just muddies the water, feel free to use the word allele. But what he decided was, well, there must be something going on whereby each of these purebred pea plants, each parent, let's say, in sexual reproduction, is donating 2 of these hereditary units, and these can be either what he called dominant or recessive. And his thinking was that the hereditary unit that made pea plants yellow, or made the peas yellow, was the dominant one. And that's why in this first generation, because they all contain the dominant one, so if that's present, that is always displayed, all of the first generation plants were pea plants, produce yellow peas. Whereas what happened when he bred the offspring is that some of these yellow peas must have been carrying the what he called recessive hereditary unit, the one which produced the green pea plants. So the fact that some of these came out as green helps explain why, helps explain how, even though these were yellow, they were still carrying some sort of hereditary unit for green pea plants. And if you manage to get a combination of these two where each of these donated the recessive hereditary unit, then what you'd end up with is a green pea, because there's no dominant yellow unit to kind of overwhelm it. Now this is quite hard to explain, and again, the next lesson is on Punnett squares, and I find this much easier to visualize when we kind of think about this in terms of Punnett squares. Having said that, again, there's a danger that then you end up just teaching GCSE stuff, and actually we're taken away from the focus, because the focus here is that we're trying to find a mechanism for inheritance. And as we then, in the next sequence of lessons after this, we move on to Darwin and we start to think about natural selection and so on. The big problem for that was, okay, well, what's actually going on here when 2 organisms reproduce? So we've talked about fertilization in these first couple of lessons, and the energy needed for fertilization. And in this lesson, we're starting to look in a bit more detail at the kind of mechanism that's going on at a micro level when fertilization takes place. So it's kind of hard to talk about, and this is a big challenge of this scheme of work. And to be honest, you may wish to not follow this order, and you may wish to do this in a different way. And I think there's good reasons both ways. The rationale was to try and tell that story and really get students thinking about the science as it happened in a kind of historical sequence. But anyway, hopefully that makes clear. The main thing to focus on, just to reiterate, is Mendel did these experiments. He expected to get the yellowy green peas. He then got this pattern of all yellow, and then 75% yellow and 25% green. From that, he came up with the idea of dominant and recessive hereditary units, or what we would now call alleles, and that proved to be crucial for having a deeper understanding of inheritance once that was combined with Darwin's theory of natural selection. So we'll look at I'll show the Punnett squares in the next video, but again, it's one to discuss with your head of department whether that is something that you want to cover.